After three rather straightforward games to begin the World Series, the intensity of the Fall Classic picked up immensely over the weekend. The Rays evened up this series at 2 games apiece thanks to an all-time classic postseason game culminating in an absolutely stunning walk-off. But the Dodgers bounced back on Sunday to take Game 5 and move one victory away from their first World Series title since 1988. The Dodgers have had the lead at some point in every inning in each of the last 27 innings of this series. But the resilient Rays, they can't be counted out just yet. Hello everyone and welcome into this Tuesday, October 27th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports, live streaming here as always on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports, and along with all our other 110 Network programming, our ATB is available on demand on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and on the website at 110sportsmedia.com. I'm Chris Brown. We have a lot to get to today on the schedule. Of course, you know the main topic. We're talking World Series. Game 6 is tonight. Tony Gonsolin going up against Blake Snell. We'll discuss the matchup coming up later in the broadcast, but let's just jump right in because there's no need for any more teasing of what's to come. We're going to start by talking about a little bit of a breakdown of the games that happened over the weekend. When we last talked on Thursday, we had the first 2 games of the World Series were completed, tied at 1. Well, over the weekend, we had, of course, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday games, an off day yesterday. So we'll go through a little bit, not a full recap, not an extensive 20-minute description of every single game, but we'll go through the basics, rewind a little bit, and go through the basics of what happened in each of those 3 games over the weekend to get to where we are now with the Dodgers leading the series 3-2. We'll go through some news and notes, most of them unrelated to the postseason itself, but other notable things still happening in the baseball world. And then we'll discuss, and this will be sort of the bigger, more analysis type segment, we'll discuss some of the top overall storylines from the World Series thus far and what they mean for the final game or 2 of this World Series, Game 6, and a potential Game 7. So we'll take a micro look here at some of these games first, and then we'll zoom out and take a look at some of the broader storylines of the series that can give us some information about what we might expect these next couple of games, or just one game, but who knows what we'll get. So we'll do that, then we'll discuss what's on deck. As always, we'll take a preview of Game 6, and we'll talk a little bit about a potential Game 7. So that's what's on tap for you today. Let's start by just talking about the games we saw over the weekend. Of course, the Dodgers lead the Rays 3-2 in the World Series. Game 6 is tonight. When we talked on Thursday, we talked about Game 1. The Dodgers came out and did a little bit of everything. They had power, they showed speed, they showed defense, patience at the plate. Clayton Kershaw was great. They got contributions up and down the lineup. The Dodgers reminded us right out of the gate in this series how complete of a team they are. They won Game 1 8-3. The Rays bounced back in Game 2 of the series. That was Wednesday night behind a dominant outing from Blake Snell, as well as a 2-home-run game from Brandon Lowe, the second baseman who had really been struggling for the Rays this postseason. And the Rays took Game 2 6-4. And that's where we left things off heading into the weekend. And over the weekend, the Dodgers largely dominated this series. They led, like I said, they've led the last 27 innings. They've led at one point during each of the last 27 innings, which would make you think that they won all 3 games over the weekend based on that statistic alone, but they won 2, dropped 1, and here we are. We'll start with Game 3. It was, again, a little bit of everything for the Dodgers. A great start from Walker Buehler. Offensive contributions, again, up and down the lineup. Some great defensive plays by the Dodgers. And some stolen bases, and a 6-2 win in Game 3 for the Dodgers, who just simply overwhelmed the Rays in Game 3 in pretty much every aspect of the game. And with that, they jumped out to a 2-1 series lead. Now, we'll talk about Walker Buehler, and we're going to talk about Clayton Kershaw more coming up in our second segment of today's broadcast. A couple things you should know from Game 3 as well. Justin Turner, when I say contributions up and down the lineup, I'm talking about Justin Turner, 2 for 5 with a homer. Max Muncy, 2 for 4 with 2 RBI. Austin Barnes, the backup catcher for the Dodgers, a RBI on a squeeze bunt in the 4th, a solo homer in the 6th. Mookie Betts, 2 for 5, 2 stolen bases. They just contributions. When I say up and down the lineup, I really mean it. Meanwhile, we'll talk about Walker Buehler coming up, but Charlie Morton, he was surprisingly hittable. He gave up 5 earned runs on 7 hits, 1 walk, and 6 strikeouts. Mookie Betts became the first NL outfielder to have multiple games with 2+ steals in the World Series since Deion Sanders in 1992. And he became just the 12th player ever with multiple multi-steal games in the World Series. So Mookie Betts, it's not like he's been out there clubbing home runs left and right, but between his great defensive plays, the stolen bases, his role in helping to manufacture some runs for the Dodgers, even when they weren't hitting home runs for very short periods. They've been hitting home runs plenty. We'll talk about that. Mookie Betts certainly having a major impact on this series. Randy Arozarena continued his incredible, historic postseason, which we'll talk about more in depth coming up as well. He continued that with a home run off of Kenley Jansen in the 9th inning in Game 3, but it didn't matter. The Dodgers were already up 6-1 at that point, and 6-2 the final. In that game, the Dodgers took a 2-1 series lead in the World Series for the first time since 1988, which, of course, was when they last won the title. So you have the Dodgers up 2-1 at this point as we head into Game 4 on Saturday. And it's hard to even put into words exactly what we saw in Game 4 because it was such a shift from everything we'd seen the first few games of the series. And it was just an all-time postseason game. Like I said here a few minutes ago, the first 3 games of the series, it's not as if they weren't entertaining games or that I had any problem with it, but there wasn't a lot of late game intensity. For the Dodgers, an 8-3 win in Game 1, that's a 5-run difference. The Rays won 6-4 in Game 2, that was kind of close, but there wasn't a whole bunch of late inning drama there. And then the Dodgers 6-2 win in Game 3 wasn't all that close either. And then Game 4 happened, and all of that went out the window. We made up for all of the, if you felt that there was any lack of intensity, late inning intensity in those first 3 games, it was made up for and more in Game 4. One of the best games and the wildest finishes in World Series history. And I think that's kind of where you have to start in discussing Game 4, honestly, is the ending. You can't say, oh, in the first inning. No, you gotta go to the ending first. The Dodgers led 7-6 in the bottom of the 9th inning. There were 2 outs. The Rays had 2 outs, but they had runners on first base and second base. Kenley Jansen was on the mound for the Dodgers, and pinch hitter Brett Phillips was sent to the plate for the Rays. A guy who hit 196 this season. He is barely a 200 career hitter at the major league level, and he had 2 strikes on him when he notched a hit into right center field, and that scored Kevin Kiermaier, the runner from second base, as Chris Taylor, the Dodgers center fielder, who wouldn't have been there if Cody Bellinger wouldn't have been out with a back problem. Chris Taylor misplayed the ball. At that point, Randy Arozarena, who was the runner at first base, so he was trucking around third. He was trying to come all the way around from first base. And eventually Taylor gets the ball in. Max Muncy, the first baseman, cuts it off, and he fires home. And at this point, Arozarena should have been out by several steps, and we would have gone into extra innings in a tie game at 7. But Arozarena, he tripped. Coming home about halfway between third base and home plate, he trips, he falls, and he's starting to retreat to third base when the Dodgers catcher, Will Smith, Well, he's thinking there's going to be a play at the plate. He's got to make a tag or they lose. He's reaching out to grab the ball, to throw from Muncy, and then sweep to give the tag, not realizing he's got a lot of time because Rosarena fell. Well, he's trying to do that real quick, and he doesn't secure the ball first. He misplays the ball gets away, and then Rosarena, after tripping, falling, retreating, he heads back toward home plate, dives in, and scores, and the Rays win Game 4. And, I mean, just saying those words can't do it justice. You've probably seen the play by now. If not, you should. It was the 5th game in World Series history to end on a walk-off involving an error. There were 2 errors charged on the play. One was to Chris Taylor, the Dodgers center fielder, at that time, and the other was charged to their catcher, Will Smith. And so the Dodgers, who looked like they, going up 3-1, that would have been obviously, that could have been like the series. That could have been, okay, they go up 3-1, and look, there was that good game from Blake Snell, but really the Dodgers have this series. Maybe it doesn't even go 6 or 7 games. Maybe it's over in Game 5. And it would have been a dominant lead, but all of a sudden the Rays have tied the series at 2 games apiece. And it was an incredible game before that walk-off, too. The Dodgers scored single runs in the first and third innings on solo home runs from Justin Turner and Corey Seager, and then every half inning from the bottom of the 4th to the top of the 8th, at least 1 run was scored. A run was scored in 8 straight half innings. That is the longest streak in World Series history. It was also the first game in World Series history where both teams scored in 3 straight innings. And it was the first World Series game with 3+ lead changes after the 6th inning, or 6th inning or later. So there is your late inning drama. I mean, the back and forth in this game was incredible. It was, I honestly didn't believe the Rays in particular would be able to keep punching back. I mean, this is a team that obviously, we'll talk about their offense, and it's a topic we've discussed. Obviously, they've got guys who can hit home runs. They've been leaning on the home runs this postseason, but they just kept punching back, and then the Dodgers would punch back, and then they would punch back. And the Dodgers end up losing despite having Turner and Seager each with 4 hits, which is something that 2 teammates haven't done in a World Series game since the 1980s. And they lost. The Rays just kept punching back. It was really a sight to see. They hit home runs in 4 straight innings from the 4th to the 7th, the first team in postseason history to do that. That was Rosarena, Renfroe, Lau, and Kiermaier. And that was Game 4. Lost in the shuffle was a great start from Jose Urias for the Dodgers. Well, I'd say great start. It was a very good start. He gave up 2 solo home runs, but almost made it through 5 innings, 1 walk, 9 strikeouts, a career-high 20 swings and misses. There was some questionable decision-making from Dave Roberts. What else is new? Certainly something that's been said before, as he told one of the Dodgers relievers that he was done after pitching in the 6th inning, but then he changed his mind when the Dodgers took the lead and he sent him back out there. It was a big mess. And the Rays bullpen kind of let them down. They kept, because look, the Dodgers kept punching back and kept adding to their lead and then going back and forth. And so the Rays relievers weren't really doing a lockdown job of keeping things in check. But the Rays kept punching back with those home runs. And all of a sudden, this series is tied at 2. And that's where it was heading into Sunday. And the story of Game 5 on Sunday, it was a pretty close game. Obviously, it could not compare to what we saw in Game 4. But Clayton Kershaw had a very strong outing, not a stellar outing, but a very strong outing. Max Muncy and Jock Peterson homered. The Dodgers won Game 5 on Sunday to move, as I mentioned, just 1 win away from the World Series title. Kershaw beat the Rays for the 2nd time in 6 days. Of course, he went back in game number 1. He threw 5 2/3 innings of 2-run ball, 2 walks, 6 strikeouts. He was really in a jam in the 4th inning. Manuel Margot then tried to steal home, and he had a quick enough reaction to just make the throw home to just get Margot at the plate. The Rays in that fourth inning had runners on the corners with no outs, and Kershaw between that play at the plate and getting, I think it was a strikeout, and then I don't know what the final play was. He got out of it, and that was crucial for him, and something that could have snowballed very quickly. And Tyler Glasnow struggles this postseason, continued. We'll talk about him coming up. He gave up 4 earned runs on 6 hits in 5 innings. And the Rays had some opportunities like in that 4th inning, but they couldn't capitalize on it. Arozarena struck again. We'll talk about that in our storylines of the series coming up in our next segment. Blake Treinen got the save for the Dodgers. And that's how we got to where we are. It's 3-2 Dodgers here in this series. And if you've been paying close attention, a lot of what I said probably not all that brand new and exciting, but I wanted to kind of give us all a refresher, walk us to how we got here. When we come back from our first break here on the show, we're going to go through some news and notes, and then we'll break down bigger picture stuff about what this all means and bigger observations about what we've learned about these two teams in this series overall, because it's a tricky balance in talking about World Series and postseason series where you don't want to get too much into one game or another, but also we're talking about small sample sizes because, look, you only need four wins to win the World Series in this series. You only need a few wins to advance, so each individual win does matter a lot, even though we're used to in a baseball context saying one game's not enough to look at for trends. But we have 5 games in the books now, and the previous seasons, the postseason before it, the regular season before it for both of these teams to talk about. So to look at for context, I should say. So when we get back from this first break, we'll go through news and notes, and then we'll look at some bigger picture takeaways, observations, themes from this series so far, and then talk a little bit about what it might tell us heading into Game 6 and a potential Game 7. So that's all coming up next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here on a Tuesday, October 27th. We're going to get to those big picture observations, storylines from the World Series coming up here in just a moment, but we are going to start with news and notes here in this segment, and we'll go through these here pretty quickly. They're pretty straightforward, but just some other notable events, occurrences, awards, discussions, reports from the last several days here. Several Player of the Year honors were announced in recent days. Atlanta first baseman Freddie Freeman was picked as the NL's outstanding player in voting by the MLBPA after hitting 341, I should say, with 13 home runs and 53 RBI this season. The Reds' Trevor Bauer was selected as NL outstanding pitcher. Padres infielder Jake Cronenworth, outstanding rookie, and Rockies pitcher Daniel Bard as comeback player. On the AL side, White Sox first baseman Jose Abreu was named outstanding player. Indians starting pitcher Shane Bieber announced as outstanding pitcher. Mariners outfielder Kyle Lewis, outstanding rookie, and Indians starter Carlos Carrasco, comeback player. Twins DH Nelson Cruz was voted as the Marvin Miller Man of the Year for leadership on and off the field. Meanwhile, MLB officially announced its Reliever of the Year recipients over the weekend. A's closer Liam Hendricks was named AL Reliever of the Year. He posted a 1.78 ERA, 13 plus strikeouts per 9 innings, 14 saves this season. The 31-year-old set to become a free agent after the end of the World Series. And Brewers reliever Devin Williams won the NL Reliever of the Year award, the third straight year that the award went to a member of the Brewers after Josh Hader won it in both 2018 and 2019. The 26-year-old Williams posted a 0.33 ERA, 53 strikeouts in 27 innings. He's also among the favorites for NL Rookie of the Year. So all those announcements, there's all these different types of awards. They're not all just, there's the voting from players for awards. Then you have the official awards from Major League Baseball. There's a lot of different types of awards that get announced. None of these are a surprise. They're noteworthy, and in that they're recognition, of course, for these players' great seasons. But nothing here really deserves great diving into. They're all pretty to be expected moves. The Gold Glove finalists were also announced. Some controversy in this about who was and wasn't included in the list of finalists, because unlike in a normal season, this year's Gold Gloves are not being determined by coach voting, but rather statistics alone, since the regional schedule that we had this year prevented coaches from getting a look at all the candidates within their league. So we'll discuss this more once the actual winners are announced, which should be in early November. Not going to really dive into, I understand the logic for why they're doing it this way, since coaches didn't get to see all the players, get a chance to see most of their league. They played in these regions, so it makes sense for this decision, but has some people riled up. Not going to really dive into this, though. Once we have Gold Gloves named, Gold Glovers for 2020 named, we'll talk about it a little bit then, perhaps. Back on Friday, Major League Baseball announced its latest update on COVID-19 testing, as MLB players extended their streak of consecutive days with no new positive tests to 54. That was through Thursday of last week, so we're approaching 60 at this point. And the good news, this is good news, of course, especially considering that cases are rising once again across the country, with a third peak apparently coming up here nationally. Lavelle E. Neal III of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune reported late last week that he's heard that as of now, the DH will be AL only next season. And this is a really interesting thing, because the Players Union and Major League Baseball would have to expand that to both leagues through bargaining. And the current collective bargaining agreement between the two sides expires after next season. Now, this seems like the kind of thing that could be worked out separate from a new collective bargaining agreement, like it happened this year, where the DH was added through negotiations given the circumstances of this season. And since it's pretty much, everybody seems to believe it's coming for the NL as well as the AL long term anyway, there's this thought that there's a good chance that it could be negotiated and figured out to have it for next year before being implemented as part of the new CBA for upcoming years afterward. But there's no clear timeline on how that would be negotiated, when we might have an answer to that. And the hot stove season's coming right up. I mean, the World Series is going to be ending here in a few days. Free agency will then start. And if NL teams don't know whether they're going to be having a DH next year or not, that's going to affect how they spend, how they plan this postseason, and the outlook for somebody like Nelson Cruz, who's going to be a free agent. Now, maybe he just resigns with the Twins, but all of a sudden, the number of teams that would consider him is completely, his market changes incredibly depending on whether the NL teams are going to have a DH or they're going to go back to not having a DH. Then all of a sudden he's just looking at AL teams, and this is a situation where the NL could go back to pitcher hitting and then transition back to a DH, which would be really weird. So it's a bit of a tricky picture right now. So hopefully something we get some clarity on here before long. Finally, Major League Baseball lost $3.1 billion during the pandemic shortened 2020 season, according to a new report from The Athletic's Evan Drellich. The league totaled $3 billion in revenue this year, but spent $6.1 billion, a league official telling that to The Athletic, and that's compared to 2019's earnings of roughly $10.7 billion. Commissioner Rob Manfred told Sportico on Monday that the 30 MLB teams combined to lose $8.3 billion overall. Manfred saying, quote, "We are going to be at historic high levels of debt, and it's going to be difficult for the industry to weather another year where we don't have fans in the ballpark and have other limitations on how much we can't play and how we can play." Financial losses have forced many teams, or led many teams, to cutting hundreds of employees around the league. So certainly not a great situation at all for that. We'll keep an eye on that, something to watch throughout this offseason. And as the conversation will eventually shift here after the World Series to the outlook for next year, next season, and how that's all going to play out. It's not something that we're going to dive into now, but it's something that's going to be a big storyline to watch moving forward. And speaking of storylines to watch, we are going to dive now into some of the top storylines from the World Series so far and what they may mean about these two teams. So I've got four that are actually in an article at 110sportsmedia.com right now. Four storylines on the World Series, and that from what we've seen in the first 5 games, that can sort of explain why things are how they are right now, and maybe give us some clues about how things could go the rest of the way, or what's going to need to change for the Rays to win, that sort of thing as well. So I got 4 takeaways here, 4 storylines, I think is the better way to frame it. And we're going to start with the Dodgers starters. And I think this is another reason why it helped to go through a little bit of a rundown of how this series played out, because in zooming out, you kind of have to also, you zoom out, you take a look at the big storylines, and then you sort of point to examples of them playing out that way. So the Dodgers' top starters have come up big. Clayton Kershaw has had his best postseason ever. He finished that best postseason ever. Now it's possible that he could come out of the bullpen in Game 7 if it gets to that point tomorrow. But this looks like his postseason is done, most likely. And it ends with 5 2/3 innings of 1-run ball in Game 5. He struck out 6 and pitched his way out of trouble, like we talked about, without his best stuff. The future Hall of Famer, there's been questions about his ability to pitch in the postseason, but look, he can do it. Yes, he's had some struggles in the postseason in the World Series, but he can absolutely pitch on the game's biggest stage, like we talked about before on Thursday's show. This is not some sort of roadblock for him, some sort of mental block. He can do it, and he's just showed that this postseason in this World Series. He has a 2-0 record, a 2.31 ERA, 14-3 strikeout to walk ratio in the World Series. In 5 postseason starts this year, a 2.93 ERA. He surpassed Justin Verlander for the most strikeouts ever in the postseason. He's at 207 now. And he won 2 games in the same postseason series for the first time in his career. Kershaw can pitch in the postseason. He can pitch on the game's biggest stage. Even when he wasn't at his absolute best in Game 5, he found a way to be productive and to deliver a quality outing. And of course, it hasn't just been him that's come up big for the Dodgers in the rotation. Walker Buehler is very quickly earning and solidifying a reputation as perhaps baseball's best big game pitcher. He entered the World Series with a 2.44 ERA in his postseason career. And then he absolutely dominated against the Rays in Game 3. He allowed just 3 hits, 1 run. He struck out 10. His Austin Barnes, his catcher for the game, said of him that might be the best I've ever seen his stuff. Buehler has struck out 39 batters in October. It's the most by a Dodger in any postseason ever. He joined Kershaw and Sandy Koufax as the only pitchers in franchise history with 10 plus strikeouts, 3 hits or fewer allowed in a World Series game. And we'll see him again in a potential Game 7 if the Rays should win tonight. Buehler and Kershaw together, a 2.04 ERA in the World Series. And Julio Urias, as we talked about, he impressed in Game 4, even though it ended with the Dodgers losing. It was very chaotic. A good start for him as well. So that's really the situation that the Dodgers are at from a starting pitching perspective. They've really only had one game where their starters' situation hasn't been great, and that was Game 2. Tony Gonsolin really just served as an opener. Just an inning and a third, and there was a pitching carousel for the Dodgers, and it did not really work out at all. It wasn't a complete disaster, but it just didn't work out. But that was really the only time when you're the Dodgers in this series where you look up after the game and say, our starter situation really did not work out. And so that's a big factor in the Dodgers holding a 3-2 series lead, and what easily could be them having won by now had that Game 4 gone differently. And what also makes that an important thing is its contrast to what we've seen from the Rays from their starting pitchers. The Rays starting pitchers, like we've talked about it, they've got an incredible group of pitchers, incredible bullpen, and you look at that, top 3 starters for them. Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, Charlie Morton, whatever order you want to put them in. Maybe you don't think any of them is Walker Buehler level, and I don't. I think he's on a different level. But when you combine, you have those 3 together, like that's a really quality trio of starters right there, even if not all of them have been complete studs the entire season. Rays starters at 3.77 ERA during the regular season, and the first 3 rounds of this postseason, Rays starters posted a 3.30 ERA. Of course, the caveat here, and just the context, I should say, for this is that Kevin Cash, of course, has a very quick hook for his starters. He's not, most of the time, he's not letting them, go 6 innings and allow 5 runs. Like, it's just, those kind of starts just don't happen. Guys get pulled earlier. But through the first 3 rounds of this postseason for the Rays, their starters have been good overall. For the World Series, their starters' ERA is 7.89. 7.89. That is just not going to get the job done. Now, a lot of that bad number, that high ERA, is from Tyler Glasnow, who, if you just look at the strikeouts, he struck out 15 in 2 World Series starts, which is great, but he's had really shaky command, particularly of his curveball, and he doesn't have a third pitch, really, that he can throw with consistency, and so then all of a sudden the Dodgers were able to sit on his fastball as a result. He became the first pitcher ever with 6+ earned runs and 6+ walks in a World Series game, and that happened in Game 1. And then in Game 5 on Sunday, he threw 3 wild pitches, most for a pitcher in the World Series, and he gave up his 9th home run of the postseason, which is the most a pitcher has ever given up in a postseason. So that's been a huge part of their problems from a starting perspective. Two of their games have been started by Glasnow and have not worked out well. He did get through 5 innings on Sunday in Game 5, but the damage to some extent was already done. So Glasnow, he's a very talented pitcher, but not good command of his curveball. All of a sudden the Dodgers can just look fastball, sit on that fastball, clobber that fastball out of the park. And so that's a big reason for why their starter's ERA is 7.89 in the World Series. But he's not the only starter for the Rays that has struggled. Charlie Morton, who has been incredible in the postseason. We know how incredible we've talked about how incredible he can be. He's been in his career in Game 7s and winner-take-all games. But even just his most recent 8 postseason appearances heading into the World Series, a 1.45 ERA, 7-0 record. He's been outstanding in the postseason of late. And I say of late over the past most recent few years. But he was surprisingly hittable in Game 3. He coughed up 5 runs on 7 hits for his first playoff loss since October 2017. And Ryan Yarbrough got the start in Game 4, 2 earned runs and 5 hits and 1 strikeout in 3 1/3 innings. It was not great, but wasn't horrendous. the team eventually still won despite the bullpen giving up some runs too because of, like we talked about, the madness of Game 4. The lone bright spot for the Rays this series, this World Series, has been Blake Snell, who took a no-hitter into the 5th inning in Game 2, struck out 9. He did allow a 2-run homer, but that was the only damage. That was the Rays' first win of the series to tie up the series at 1 game apiece. And Blake Snell, for the Rays, if you want to look on the bright side, of course, he's on the mound tonight. He's on the mound tonight for the Rays up against Tony Gonsolin. So if he can deliver again, then the Rays may be able to get that win to force a Game 7. So that's the good news for them, is that they do have their best starter of this World Series out there for Game 6. But really, I think the bigger point here in the storyline that I'm hitting on is that, look, there are a lot of ways to break down the World Series thus far. But one is simply that you look at the Rays in their 5 games, they've gotten really one good start. The Dodgers in their 5 games have only once not gotten a good start. Dodgers, 4 quality outings, 2 from Kershaw, 1 from Buehler, 1 from Urias. You look at the Rays, you got Snell, and then maybe Yarbrough is not horrible, but that's a big difference right there. I mean, all these things, these starts to the game, that sets the tone. Obviously, we had late inning chaos in Game 4, but a lot of the time it's all about setting the tone and keeping your opponent off the board early, and the Rays starters haven't been able to do that, with only really one exception. And so that's a big factor in why you see the Dodgers leading 3-2, and had Game 4 not finished the way it had, it could have been Dodgers already having won the World Series. But that's neither here nor there at this point. But that's one trend that we're seeing. And of course, like I said, though, looking forward, it's Blake Snell on the mound tonight for the Rays. So they're going to need him, of course, like it goes without saying, they're going to need him to step up with another great outing. Now, fortunately, he's not necessarily in a position where, he was horrible his first time out in this World Series, and now he's got to, pull it together. But, I mean, he was great in Game 2, but in some sense, it doesn't really matter. You got to do it tonight. You got to show up. Like, who cares about the trends, whether he's been good or bad? He's going to have to show up tonight for the Rays to set the tone early the way that they want to. Next storyline I want to discuss here is the next 2 storylines all revolve around. I mean, the first 2 are really pitching related. It's hitting on the Dodgers and comparing that to the Rays, and then we're going to do the same for hitting. And with these next 2 storylines, Dave Roberts' club picked the perfect time to start firing on all cylinders offensively. 9 different Dodgers players have homered in the World Series. That's the most for any team in any postseason series ever. 9 Dodgers have homered in this World Series. The team has also hit double-digit home runs in 8 straight postseason games. No other team has ever come close to that in a single postseason ever in MLB history. So they got so many guys who can hit a home run, who can go deep at any point in the game, at any point in the lineup. And they're hitting enough home runs every game. They're going out there and they're getting 2 or plus every game. That's hard to compete with when you're the Rays. When you're the Rays offense, which we'll talk about, and they've done a good job in a couple of games with competing with that, but it's hard to compete against. But what really makes this Dodgers lineup even more talented than just, okay, all these guys can hit home runs and they're hitting home runs, is they also can score without it. In Game 1 of this series, the Dodgers scored 4 runs in the 5th inning to take a commanding lead that they would never give up, thanks to a walk, a double steal, a fielder's choice RBI groundout, and 3 RBI singles. I mean, that's not doubles, triples, home runs. It's none of it. I mean, we're talking walks, double steals, RBI groundouts, and RBI singles. In Game 3, they had, in a 2-run 4th inning, 3 singles, a safety squeeze, and a stolen base. Those are just 2 examples. We've seen this Dodgers team, all these players can hit home runs, but also they can manufacture runs. They can play small ball. They're stealing bases. Mookie Betts, even Corey Seager getting involved in stealing these bases. They can get the RBI ground out. They can just line the singles into center field. They can string together hits, and they can do the little things as well. They're getting all these 2-out hits. That's been one of the big storylines of the postseason for them and the World Series for them, is how many hits they're getting, how many runs they're scoring with 2 outs. And it's quite remarkable. They're on pace for the highest percentage of runs scored coming with 2 outs in a single postseason ever. Man, that's something that, like, I don't know how much stock you put into weighing the factor of it being with 2 outs. But regardless, offense is incredible, and it's so well-rounded that it's hard to compete against. Now, as for specific players for the Dodgers, Corey Seager has been the offensive MVP of the World Series thus far, and he could very well end up being the World Series MVP should the Dodgers win. The shortstop hitting .471 in this series, 2 homers, 4 RBI, 5 walks, 7 runs scored. He trails only Randy Arozarena, who we'll talk about in a minute, in home runs in a single postseason, and he trails only David Freese in 2011 for RBI in a single postseason. He has 19 runs batted in the 2020 playoffs. Also making a huge impact offensively for the Dodgers is Justin Turner, the third baseman. He's hitting .364 in the series. He hit first-inning home runs in back-to-back games. Max Muncy has a .522 on-base percentage in this series. He has 6 RBI to lead the Dodgers in the World Series. And, of course, you have Jock Peterson, Betts, Barnes, Taylor, Bellinger, Will Smith. They've all homered. I mean, everybody's getting involved, of course. Those are some of the players who are making the biggest impact. But it's hard from the Rays' perspective. You can't take it easy for anybody. Even the backup catcher can take you deep at any point. Now, to contrast this to the Rays situation, Randy Arozarena, we're going to talk about him here in a second. He's continued his just historic postseason, and he's gotten just enough help to make things interesting. He's gotten just enough offensive help to make things interesting, but it hasn't been the Rays finding a new gear offensively and all of a sudden, with the exception of Game 4, they haven't really found this new gear and gotten everybody going, and 3, 4, or 5 players are hot now. We're still talking about just a couple players doing most of the heavy lifting, but there's been just enough contributions alongside Arozarena keeping things up that the Rays have been able to take a couple of games. So let's start with Arozarena, and the first thing, yes, we should note, this is an expanded postseason format for him, so he's had more opportunities to pick up hits, to get home runs, to get these records. So we're not talking about, regular season. We're talking about, 162 games, and not every player plays that many, of course. But you're talking about a set sample size. But with postseason, with it being expanded this year and teams going different lengths and requiring different numbers of games to win the World Series or get eliminated, whatever it might be, there's some inconsistencies here. But this one thing is very clear, is that Randy Arozarena is in the midst of one of the best postseasons we've ever seen for a player in MLB history. The 25-year-old outfielder now has 9 home runs this postseason and 27 hits this postseason. Both of those are records for an MLB player ever in a single postseason. No MLB player has ever had as many hits, has ever had as many home runs in a single postseason as Randy Arozarena has in the 2020 playoffs. It's truly remarkable. This is a guy who's just stayed locked in. I really thought, okay, this has been incredible. It's a great story. Maybe he was even a breakout star next year in the regular season, but he's not going to be able to keep this up in the World Series, and he's continuing to make a huge offensive impact because he's so locked in, and he has the ability to hit the ball to all fields. He's not trapped in he needs this specific pitch in this specific location to hit it this specific direction. He's hitting the ball to all fields. He's just mashing. There's not a lot else to say for him other than just, wow, every time he does something incredible, and every time he steps up to the plate, you gotta watch, because it could be something else historic. But coming into the World Series, and we talked about this, I believe, last week, we knew that the Rays were going to need some significant offensive contributions from guys outside of Arozarena. And they haven't gotten those contributions with a great deal of consistency, but there have been some players who stepped up in individual games. In game two, it was Brandon Lau with 2 home runs. He had been slumping as he helped them get the win, and Blake Snell's great start. And then in game four, Brett Phillips, who was a 202 career hitter in the majors, he delivered the RBI single that ultimately resulted in the Rays winning and a walk-off in just absurd fashion like we talked about. And Kevin Kiermaier, the center fielder, has also been really good in the World Series. 2 home runs, 375 batting average. But Lau, as one example, he hasn't had a single hit outside of his home runs this World Series. And it's clear that the Rays have several guys who are capable of big moments. They had 14 total runs in their 2 wins, which is that's impressive, right? We kind of thought that maybe if the Rays are winning World Series games, it's because the Dodgers offense, fell quiet one night and they get a win 4-3. But no, they have 14 total runs scored in their 2 wins. But they're going to need the exact right combination of timely hitting, better pitching than we've seen from them overall in this series if they're going to get 2 straight wins here. It's not something that's really probable. It's not something that you would predict, that most people would predict. Just looking at the odds, looking at the stats, looking at the numbers, looking at these teams. But it's certainly far from impossible. This series is absolutely not over. I mean, 2 wins in a row, and all of a sudden the Rays have the World Series title. This is a really resilient team. Blake Snell is on the mound for them tonight. A lot could happen. Tony Gonsolin has struggled this postseason. The Rays could knock him out early. Snell could be very good again. All of a sudden, it's Game 7. You've got Charlie Morton, Walker Buehler. Anything can happen. Series is absolutely, positively still very much up for grabs. You're not comfortable in the slightest if you're the Dodgers. You cannot afford to be comfortable. You cannot afford to be even optimistic. You just have to go out and win Game 6. That's your goal right now. And the Rays, you know what you got to do. You're going to have to win 2 straight. I mean, it's obvious thinking, it's obvious dialogue. I'm not saying anything revolutionary here, but those have been some of the key storylines of this series so far. Starting pitching. Dodgers has been generally great from their top guys. Rays have gotten a great start from Snell in Game 2, but otherwise their great starters, have let them down. The Dodgers are scoring in so many ways, up and down the lineup, contributions, home runs, small ball, you name it. Rosarena has kept it up. There's been some big games from other guys, and that's been enough to keep things interesting. And keeping things interesting, I say keeping things interesting. What I really mean is keeping the Rays in this series. And they're in this series, and any team can win 2 games in a row against any other team in Major League Baseball. So I shouldn't even say maybe keeping it interesting is probably not even the right phrasing. They've gotten enough offensive contributions from guys to stay in this series, to make this a series, a really good World Series. Now it's just a matter of what we see in Game 6 and a potential Game 7, and I can't predict that, but I mean, it's hard for me to, I can't, say I know what's going to happen. I mean, baseball is a sport where in any given game, your star can go for 5 with 5 strikeouts, and your nobody last man on the bench could hit 2 home runs. But those storylines so far kind of indicate what we're going to need to see from the Rays if they're going to come back, and what we're going to need to see from the Dodgers if they're going to close this thing out. And I'm kind of getting into my next point, which is one we're going to discuss after the break. We're going to get into what's on deck. We're going to preview a little bit more specifically Game 6 tonight in Arlington, Texas. So that's coming up next. What's on deck is next year after our final break here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back one final time to this Tuesday, October 27th edition of Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. Just time for What's on Deck, where we always preview what's coming up in major leagues, big storylines, big games coming up, and Game 6 is tonight, this evening, 8 p.m. Eastern, as it's been all series on Fox. Blake Snell, Tony Gonsolin. What we've learned, we talked about, Blake Snell was great in Game 2. He's been really the Rays' only great starter in this series. Tony Gonsolin, of course, as we talked about, he served as basically an opener earlier in this series, but Dave Roberts said yesterday that the team is actually hoping to get 5 to 6 innings from Tony Gonsolin in Game 6, and it appears Gonsolin knew this was the plan for him for the last few days, so he's been working toward having a regular type of start rather than an opening type of deal. And that's what we have for you tonight. Blake Snell, Tony Gonsolin. Of course, Gonsolin is a guy who's had a great season in the regular season, but he struggled in the postseason. So, I don't have to tell. I don't have to tell you that a good start from him would be crucial for the Dodgers. That a bad start from him could get them into trouble, especially in a situation where Blake Snell is on the mound as your opponent. So there's no. I can give you the context for both of these guys. As far as my prediction, I'm torn between whether I think the Dodgers are just going to be so motivated to get it done tonight and the Rays' ability to be just so resilient, and they've got Blake Snell on the mound. I'm going to predict that this goes to a Game 7. That's my prediction. I don't have a great deal of confidence in this. I just feel like the Rays are this would just be, like, part of me feels like 2020 isn't going to just deprive us of a Game 7 winner takes all World Series. Like, that just feels like we got to have that. I'm not saying I'm not saying that I would have a problem with the Dodgers winning tonight, but part of it feels like you can't pick against a winner take all Game 7 in this series, in these circumstances, in this kind of season. So that's what I'm going to predict. And if we get to a Game 7, it'll be Walker Buehler against Charlie Morton. Morton struggled, as we talked about, in his last outing, but he's been incredible in the postseason. He's been the best pitcher of all time in winner-take-all postseason games. So you'd have Morton against Buehler. That would be an incredible matchup, and who knows what could happen. That game would be tomorrow night, Wednesday evening. The Dodgers, of course, they're trying to avoid falling short in the Fall Classic for the third time in 4 years. The Rays looking for their first World Series title ever. It's going to be incredible to watch, see how this all plays out. I don't have any incredible insight of what I can predict is going to happen, but I'm saying it goes to Game 7. Either way, whether it goes to Game 7 or not, my confidence is still with the Dodgers. My pick is still with the Dodgers. I don't know if I say my confidence is with the Dodgers. I'm still going with the Dodgers. I said Dodgers in 6 heading into this series. And I guess now I'm predicting it goes to a Game 7 because it just feels like it has to, but in some sense. But we'll see how it all plays out. The only thing that I do know for sure is that by the next time we're on the air on Thursday, on Around the Bases at this same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, we will have a World Series champion. Whether that comes tonight or whether that comes on Wednesday night, we will have a World Series champion to talk about on Thursday's episode of Around the Bases. So you won't want to miss that. You also won't want to miss our other 110 Sports Live programming. Josh Molnix is back with the J-Mole Show tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm sure he'll be talking World Series, of course, no matter what happens, whether the Rays force a Game 7 or the Dodgers take the title. I'm sure he'll be talking about that tomorrow on the show, as well as other major developments from the sports world. Josh Doran will be back on Tuesday as well with Touchline Talk, discussing the latest from the soccer world. And, of course, back with you again, 1 p.m. Eastern, same time, same place on Thursday to discuss whatever team wins the World Series. So enjoy Game 6, and if we need it, a Game 7 of the World Series, and back on Thursday here on Around the Bases to break it all down. Stay safe, and I will talk to you again on Thursday.